My name is Sophia Garcia. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story about when success brings the family back, the price of forgiveness. I never imagined that buying my dream home would become the biggest nightmare of my life. You see, the day I closed on my beautiful $500,000 house, I thought I had finally made it. I posted one picture on social media, just one innocent celebration of my hard work, and within hours my phone started buzzing. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, the same people who couldn't show up to my wedding 5 years ago, were suddenly calling me nonstop. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, hit that subscribe button and like this video because you're going to want to hear how this unfolds. Have you ever achieved something incredible only to have the wrong people suddenly care? I sat there in my empty living room, boxes stacked everywhere, staring at my mother's text message that said, "We need to talk about something important." My hands were literally shaking because deep down, I knew exactly what this was about. For years, I had dreamed about the moment my parents would finally be proud of me, finally see me as worthy of their time and attention. But now that the moment was here, it felt completely wrong, like a cruel joke the universe was playing on me. The success I worked so hard for was about to become a test I never prepared for. Let me paint you a picture of where I was sitting when that call came through. My new home had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble countertops I picked out myself, and a master bedroom bigger than my first apartment. I had climbed from working 2 minimum wage jobs to becoming a senior marketing director at one of the biggest tech companies in the state. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration represented a sacrifice, a late night, a moment when I chose myself over seeking their approval. And now they wanted back in, not because they missed me, but because I finally had something they needed. The irony wasn't lost on me that my phone was exploding with messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. My cousin Jessica suddenly wanted to reconnect. My uncle Thomas was asking about catching up. And even my brother Daniel, who hadn't returned my calls in 18 months, was congratulating me on my amazing achievement. It's funny how success has this magical power to make people remember you exist, isn't it? I could see right through it, but part of me, that little girl who used to wait by the window for parents who never showed up, wanted to believe maybe things could be different this time. But here's the thing that kept playing in my mind like a broken record. Where were all these people when I graduated college with honors and no one from my family attended? Where were they when I got married to my husband Marcus in a small courthouse ceremony because I couldn't afford a real wedding and had no family support? The weight of those memories sat heavy on my chest as I stared at my phone, knowing that answering that call would either give me the family reconciliation I always wanted or break whatever was left of my heart. You won't believe what happened next, but before I tell you, I need you to understand the history that led to this moment. Growing up in the Martinez household meant learning very early that love was conditional, and I apparently never met the conditions. My parents, Robert and Linda, had this vision of what their daughter should be: quiet, obedient, someone who would marry young to a man they approved of and live close by. Instead, I was ambitious, outspoken, and fell in love with Marcus, a kind teacher who didn't come from money or status. Before I go further, do me a favor and hit that like button if you've ever felt like you had to choose between your dreams and your family's approval, and subscribe, because this story gets even more intense. Have you ever disappointed someone just by being yourself? The rejection started small, almost invisible, like tiny cuts that you don't notice until you're bleeding everywhere. My mother would forget to call me on my birthday but never missed my brother Daniel's. My father would skip my school plays but never missed Daniel's football games, even driving 3 hours to watch him sit on the bench. When I got accepted to a prestigious university on a partial scholarship, my parents refused to help with the remaining costs because they said I was being selfish for wanting to move away. I took out loans, worked night shifts at a diner, and put myself through school while my brother got a free ride at a local community college that my parents happily paid for in full. The day I told them I was engaged to Marcus was the day our relationship went from cold to frozen solid. My mother, Linda, looked at him like he was dirt on her expensive carpet and told me I was throwing my life away on a man with no ambition. My father, Robert, didn't even stay for the conversation, just walked out of the room shaking his head in disappointment. They didn't come to our wedding, didn't send a card, didn't acknowledge it happened at all. I wore a simple white dress from a department store. Marcus wore his only suit, and our 2 best friends were our witnesses in a ceremony that lasted exactly 12 minutes. What hurt even more than their absence was their presence in everyone else's life. I'd see photos on Facebook of them attending my cousin's elaborate wedding, my brother's graduation party, family barbecues I was never invited to. My mother would post pictures with captions about family being everything, while I sat alone in my small apartment wondering what I had done to deserve being erased. Marcus would hold me while I cried, reminding me that their inability to see my worth didn't diminish my value, but those words felt hollow when you're aching for a mother's hug or a father's pride. For years, I carried this weight of not being good enough, of somehow failing at the one thing that should be automatic, being loved by your parents. I threw myself into my career with an obsession that my therapist, Dr. Chen, later told me was me trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. Every promotion, every accomplishment, every success was me screaming, "Look at me, I matter," into a void that never echoed back. And then I bought that house, posted that one picture, and suddenly they could hear me perfectly clear. The question that kept me up that entire night was simple but terrifying. Did they finally see me? Or did they just see what I could do for them? My wedding day should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, but instead it became the clearest symbol of how invisible I was to my own family. Marcus and I stood in that courthouse on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, holding hands and promising forever to each other while my parents were 200 miles away, having brunch with my brother Daniel and his girlfriend. I had sent them the invitation 3 months in advance, called them twice to remind them, even offered to pay for their hotel if money was the issue. My mother Linda's response was ice cold. "Sophia, we don't support this marriage, so don't expect us to celebrate it." Those words carved themselves into my heart like a scar that never fully healed. If you know what it feels like to celebrate your biggest moments alone, subscribe to this channel and smash that like button because I'm about to share the painful memories that shaped who I became. When was the last time someone who should have been there simply chose not to show up for you? But the wedding wasn't the first time they chose absence over presence. It was just the most painful. When I graduated from college with a 3.9 GPA summa cum laude, with honors in business administration, I had 3 tickets reserved for my family in the front row of that auditorium. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma, and looked out into the crowd hoping to see them cheering for me. Those 3 seats sat empty the entire ceremony while I watched other families cry tears of joy and hold up signs for their graduates. After the ceremony, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called my mother to ask why they didn't come, and she told me they forgot because they were busy helping Daniel move into his new apartment. The apartment, by the way, that they were paying for while I was drowning in student loan debt. Every major milestone in my life followed the same devastating pattern of rejection and neglect. My high school graduation, they showed up late, left early, and spent the whole time on their phones. My 21st birthday, they sent a text message that said, "Happy birthday," with no call, no card, no acknowledgement. The day I got my first major promotion at work, making me the youngest senior director in my company's history. Silence. I learned to stop expecting anything from them, to celebrate my victories alone or with Marcus, to build a life where their approval wasn't necessary for my happiness. But here's the thing about childhood wounds. They don't heal just because you ignore them. They just get buried deeper until something triggers them back to the surface. The worst part wasn't even the big moments they missed. It was the 1,000 small ways they showed me I didn't matter. My mother would call my brother every single day but wouldn't return my calls for weeks. My father would ask Daniel about his day, his dreams, his problems. But when I tried to share my struggles, he would change the subject or walk away. Family dinners when I was younger felt like being a ghost at my own table. They would talk about Daniel's achievements, Daniel's future, Daniel's everything, while I sat there silently eating, wondering what I had to do to earn a fraction of that attention. I tried everything. Being the perfect daughter, getting perfect grades, staying out of trouble, helping around the house. But nothing I did was ever enough to make them see me. The emotional neglect created this deep hole inside me that I kept trying to fill with achievement and success. I thought if I just worked hard enough, accomplished enough, proved myself valuable enough, they would finally look at me with pride instead of disappointment. Every award I won was secretly for them. Every promotion was me screaming, "See, I'm worthy of your love," into a void that never answered back. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me understand that I was trying to earn something that should have been given freely, that parental love shouldn't have conditions attached to it. But understanding something intellectually and healing from it emotionally are 2 completely different journeys, and I was still on the painful road of the latter when that phone call came through. The path from that lonely college graduate drowning in debt to the woman who bought a $500,000 house was anything but easy or straightforward. After graduation, I started at the very bottom of the marketing world, making $32,000 a year as a junior associate at a small firm in the city. I worked 70-hour weeks, took every project no one else wanted, volunteered for the assignments that required weekend work and late nights. While my colleagues went out for happy hour, I was at my desk learning everything I could about digital marketing, analytics, consumer behavior, brand strategy. Marcus would bring me dinner at the office because I forgot to eat, would massage my shoulders when they cramped from hours hunched over my computer, never once complaining about how little time we had together. My big break came 3 years into that job when I pitched a campaign idea that everyone told me was too risky, too different, too bold. The client was a struggling eco-friendly clothing brand that was about to go under, and they needed something revolutionary to stay alive. I proposed a social media strategy that focused on authentic storytelling instead of traditional advertising, partnering with real customers to share their sustainability journeys. My boss thought I was crazy, told me I was going to embarrass the company, but I believed in it so deeply that I offered to work on it for free on top of my regular assignments if they'd just let me try. They agreed, probably thinking I'd fail and learn a lesson about staying in my lane. That campaign went viral in ways no one predicted, generating 15 million impressions in the first month and increasing the client's sales by 340% in 6 months. Major marketing publications wrote articles about the strategy, industry leaders started following my work, and suddenly, I wasn't just another junior associate anymore. The success led to a job offer from a major tech company that tripled my salary overnight, putting me at $96,000 a year with benefits and stock options. I'll never forget calling Marcus with the news, both of us crying happy tears in our tiny one-bedroom apartment, realizing that we might actually be okay, that all the sacrifice was starting to pay off. I wanted to call my parents too, to share the joy, but I stopped myself knowing they probably wouldn't care, or would find some way to diminish it. The next 7 years were a blur of promotions, bigger clients, higher stakes projects, and increasingly impressive titles. I went from marketing manager to senior marketing manager to director of digital strategy to finally senior director of marketing operations, overseeing a team of 43 people and managing an annual budget of $12 million. Each step up the ladder came with its own challenges: learning to lead teams, managing office politics, proving myself in rooms full of men who doubted a young Latina woman could handle the pressure. I faced discrimination, microaggressions, people who tried to take credit for my work, bosses who tested me harder than they tested my male colleagues. But I never gave up because giving up would mean my parents were right about me being a disappointment, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. By the time I turned 31, Marcus and I had saved enough for a down payment on our dream home. We spent 6 months looking at properties, walking through houses that felt too big for just the two of us, but perfect for the family we hoped to build someday. When we found the house with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the marble countertops, I knew it was the one before we even finished the tour. The day we closed on that house, signing papers that made us homeowners of a $500,000 property, I felt this overwhelming mix of pride and sadness. Pride because I had done what everyone said was impossible, climbing from nothing to this incredible achievement. Sadness because the two people whose approval I craved most weren't there to celebrate with us, and deep down I knew that if they reached out now, it wouldn't be to celebrate me, but to use me. And that's exactly what happened next. The phone call came exactly 3 days after I posted that picture of my new house on Instagram. I was unpacking boxes in the kitchen when my phone lit up with Mom calling, and my heart literally stopped for a second. Marcus looked at me from across the room and mouthed, "You don't have to answer it." But my hand was already reaching for the phone like it had a mind of its own. I answered with a shaky, "Hello?" and heard my mother's voice for the first time in almost 2 years, sweet as honey, asking how I was doing like we talked every day. The fakeness in her tone made my stomach turn, but that little girl inside me who still craved her mother's love held on to every word. If this sounds familiar to you, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video, because what I'm about to tell you next will shock you just as much as it shocked me. Have you ever gotten a call from someone who ignored you for years and instantly knew they wanted something? My mother, Linda, spent the first 5 minutes of the call doing small talk that felt like walking through a minefield. She commented on how beautiful the house looked, asked about Marcus's teaching job, mentioned the weather, talked about our neighbor's new car, anything except the real reason she was calling. I could hear the nervousness in her voice, the way she kept clearing her throat between sentences, and I knew something big was coming. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of meaningless chit-chat, she said the words that changed everything. "Sophia, your father and I need to talk to you about something important, something financial." My blood ran cold because I knew exactly where this was going, but I let her continue anyway. She explained that my father, Robert, had lost his job 6 months ago when his company downsized, and they were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments on the house they'd lived in for 30 years. They had already burned through their savings, maxed out 2 credit cards, and were 3 months behind on payments with the bank threatening foreclosure. My mother's voice cracked as she talked about possibly losing their home, about the shame of having to move into an apartment at their age, about how scared they were. Part of me felt genuine sympathy for their situation because losing your home is terrifying no matter who you are. But the other part of me, the part that remembered every missed birthday and ignored achievement, was screaming that this was manipulation at its finest. Then came the actual ask, delivered with the kind of casualness that made it even more insulting. "We were hoping you could help us out, just until your father finds another job," my mother said, her voice dripping with false humility. She mentioned the number they needed, $15,000 to catch up on missed payments and avoid foreclosure. $15,000, which was more money than they'd ever spent on me in my entire life combined. She didn't say loan. She didn't offer to pay me back. She didn't acknowledge the irony of asking the daughter they rejected for help now that she had money. She just assumed that because I had succeeded, because I had bought that house, that I owed them this Jew rescue from their problems. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, with my mother listing all the reasons why I should help. Family obligation, Christian duty, the fact that they raised me and fed me and put a roof over my head. She never once apologized for missing my wedding, for ignoring my calls, for making me feel invisible for most of my adult life. She never acknowledged that this was the first real conversation we'd had in years, and it was only happening because she needed money. When I told her I needed time to think about it, her sweet tone turned slightly cold, reminding me that family helps family, and that she hoped I hadn't become too successful to remember where I came from. I hung up that phone and immediately broke down crying in Marcus's arms, not because I was sad, but because I was angry at myself for even considering helping people who had hurt me so deeply. But the decision ahead of me was more complicated than just yes or no. It was about deciding who I wanted to be and what kind of life I wanted to live. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, just laid in bed staring at the ceiling while my mind ran through every possible scenario and consequence. On one hand, I had worked so hard to get where I was, and giving them $15,000 wouldn't bankrupt me, but it would definitely hurt. On the other hand, they were still my parents, and watching them lose their home when I had the power to prevent it made me feel like a terrible person. Marcus held my hand in the darkness and reminded me that being a good person doesn't mean letting people use you, but even his wisdom couldn't quiet the war raging inside my head. The guilt was overwhelming, this crushing weight on my chest that whispered, "What kind of daughter are you?" every time I considered saying no. I made a pros and cons list the next morning, sitting at my beautiful new dining table with my coffee getting cold while I tried to logic my way through an emotional decision. Pro, they wouldn't lose their house and I'd feel like I did the right thing. Con, it sets a precedent that they can ignore me until they need something. Pro, maybe this could be the start of rebuilding our relationship. Con, relationships built on financial transactions aren't real relationships. Pro, I'd be honoring the commandment to honor thy father and mother. Con, do parents who dishonor their children deserve that honor back? The list went on, and by the end of it, I was more confused than when I started. I called my therapist, Dr. Chen, for an emergency session, desperately needing someone objective to help me sort through the mess in my head. She asked me one question that cut through all the noise. "Sophia, if you give them this money, will it heal the wounds they created, or will it just put an expensive Band-Aid over them?" I sat there in silence because I knew the answer. Knew that $15,000 wouldn't make my mother show up to my future children's birthdays, wouldn't make my father suddenly interested in my life, wouldn't erase years of feeling invisible and unwanted. Dr. Chen reminded me that my guilt wasn't about the money at all. It was about that little girl inside me still hoping that if she just did the right thing, her parents would finally love her the way she deserved. That realization hit me like a truck, because it was so painfully true. The next few days were torture, as I wrestled with the decision while my mother called twice a day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I talked to Marcus about it endlessly, analyzing every angle until he finally said something that shifted my perspective completely. "Sophia, you're not choosing between helping them or not helping them. You're choosing between your mental health and their financial comfort." He was right, because giving them that money wouldn't just cost me $15,000. It would cost me my peace, my boundaries, my self-respect. It would teach them that abandoning me had no real consequences, that they could treat me like garbage for years and still get rewarded when convenient for them. It would reinforce my own pattern of seeking validation from people who would never give it freely. I realized that this wasn't actually about the money or even about my parents. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be and what kind of life I wanted to live going forward. Did I want to be someone who gave endlessly to people who took without gratitude? Or did I want to be someone who valued herself enough to set boundaries? Did I want a relationship with my parents built on obligation and guilt? Or did I want authentic connections with people who genuinely cared about me? The more I sat with these questions, the clearer my answer became, even though it was the hardest decision I'd ever had to make. What I decided next would change my family dynamics forever, and there would be no going back once I made the choice. But sometimes the right path is also the most painful one. I spent an entire week diving deep into my past with Dr. Chen, unpacking why I felt so desperate for my parents' approval, even after everything they'd done to me. We talked about attachment theory, about how children are hardwired to seek love from their caregivers, even when those caregivers are toxic or neglectful. Dr. Chen explained that my brain had learned as a young child that love was something I had to earn, not something I deserved just for existing, and that programming was still running in the background of every decision I made. Understanding this didn't make the pain go away, but it helped me see that my need for their approval wasn't about them being worthy of giving it. It was about me never receiving the unconditional love every child deserves. If you've ever chased approval from someone who constantly moved the goalposts, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because understanding this pattern might just save you years of pain. When did you realize that some people will never give you what you're searching for, no matter how hard you try? The truth I had to face was brutal and liberating at the same time. I had spent my entire adult life trying to become successful enough that my parents would finally see my worth. Every promotion I celebrated was secretly a performance for an audience of 2 who weren't even watching. Every achievement was me screaming into the void, hoping they'd finally turn around and say, "We're proud of you." My friend and colleague Jennifer had noticed this pattern years ago when I got promoted to director, and my first reaction wasn't joy, but disappointment that my parents didn't call to congratulate me. She asked me a question that haunted me. "Sophia, when are you going to stop living your life for people who don't even show up to witness it?" I didn't have an answer then, but I was starting to find one now. Marcus and I had long conversations about what giving them the money would actually accomplish beyond the obvious financial rescue. He asked me to imagine the best-case scenario. I give them $15,000, they keep their house, and then what? Would they suddenly start calling me regularly, inviting me to family dinners, showing interest in my life? Would my mother apologize for missing my wedding, or my father express regret for all the moments he chose to ignore me? Marcus gently pointed out that in 32 years of knowing them, they had never once changed their behavior toward me, and a financial transaction wasn't going to magically transform them into the parents I deserved. The painful reality was that I wasn't buying their house. I was trying to buy their love, and love that has a price tag isn't really love at all. I started journaling every night, writing down specific memories of times I had bent over backwards seeking their approval and how it made me feel. There was the time I won a regional award for a marketing campaign and drove 3 hours to tell them in person, only to have my father spend the entire visit talking about my brother Daniel's new girlfriend. There was my 25th birthday when I organized a small dinner hoping they'd come, and they canceled 2 hours before because they were tired. There was every Christmas gift I carefully chose and wrapped, hoping this would be the year they acknowledged the effort, only to receive a generic thank you card weeks later. Page after page of my journal filled with evidence that no amount of achievement, effort, or financial generosity would ever be enough to earn what they should have given freely: unconditional parental love. The breaking point came when my mother called again and said something that revealed her true intentions completely. She mentioned that once I helped them with the house, they were also hoping I could help my brother Daniel with some credit card debt he'd accumulated, maybe $8,000 or so, since you're doing so well financially and family takes care of family. In that moment, the fog lifted completely, and I saw the situation with perfect clarity. This wasn't going to be a one-time help to get them through a rough patch. This was going to be the beginning of a pattern where I became the family ATM, expected to bail everyone out because I had committed the crime of being successful. The price of their approval wasn't $15,000. It was my entire sense of self-worth, my boundaries, and my financial future, and that was a price I finally realized I wasn't willing to pay. The night I made my final decision, I sat in my home office surrounded by everything my hard work had built: the mahogany desk I'd saved for, the awards on the wall, the view of the city skyline through windows I owned. I thought about that 22-year-old girl eating ramen noodles for dinner so she could afford textbooks, working double shifts at a diner while her classmates partied, crying herself to sleep in a tiny apartment, wondering why she wasn't good enough for her own parents to love. That girl had survived and thrived not because of her family, but in spite of them. She had built this life brick by brick with no help, no support, no safety net, and she deserved to protect what she'd built from people who wanted to benefit from her success without having contributed to her journey. I called my mother the next evening, my hands surprisingly steady as I dialed her number. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my voice came out clear and firm when she answered. I told her that I had thought carefully about her request, and that I wouldn't be giving them the money. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, heavy with shock because I don't think she ever considered that I might say no. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness and revealed the anger underneath. "So you're just going to let us lose our home? After everything we did for you?" That phrase, "after everything we did for you," almost made me laugh because what exactly had they done except provide the bare minimum required by law? I had prepared for this moment with Dr. Chen, rehearsing what I would say and how I would hold my boundary when the guilt trip started. I told my mother, Linda, calmly that I loved them and didn't want them to suffer, but that giving them money wouldn't fix the real problems in our relationship. I explained that for years I had tried to earn their love and approval through achievement and success, and I was finally accepting that nothing I did would ever be enough for them. I said that if they wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, it needed to start with acknowledging the pain they'd caused, not with financial transactions. My mother's response was exactly what I expected. She called me selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted, said I had changed and that success had made me forget my roots. The accusations hurt, but they didn't break me because I had finally accepted a truth that set me free. Their opinion of me wasn't the truth about me. My worth wasn't determined by whether Robert and Linda Martinez approved of my choices or valued my existence. I was a successful woman who had built an incredible life through determination and resilience. I was a loving wife to Marcus who showed me what real partnership looked like. I was a good friend, a respected colleague, a person of integrity and strength. Their failure to see that was their loss, not my deficiency. When my mother said, "Don't expect us to be there for you when you need us," I almost told her they never had been there anyway. But instead, I just said, "I understand," and let the silence speak for itself. After I hung up, I expected to feel crushing guilt or devastating sadness, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The weight I'd been carrying around for 3 decades, the constant burden of trying to be good enough for people who would never be satisfied, just lifted off my shoulders and floated away. Marcus found me sitting in our living room with tears streaming down my face, and when he asked if I was okay, I smiled and said, "I think I finally am." I had chosen myself over their approval, my mental health over their financial crisis, my future over their past treatment of me, and it felt like stepping out of a prison I hadn't even realized I was in. The decision would have consequences. Some relationships would end and some family members would judge me. But for the first time in my life, I was prioritizing my own peace over everyone else's expectations, and that was priceless. The days following my decision to say no to my parents felt like I was walking through a new world where I finally controlled my own life. I started making choices based on what felt right for me, instead of what might finally earn someone else's approval. Marcus and I sat down and created a vision board for our future, the family we wanted to build, the trips we wanted to take, the life we wanted to create together, without the shadow of toxic family dynamics hanging over us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning around what my parents might think or hoping they'd finally show up to celebrate with me. If you're ready to start choosing yourself over toxic family expectations, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because what I'm about to share might be the permission you need to finally set yourself free. When was the last time you made a decision purely for your own happiness without worrying about disappointing someone else? I decided to invest the $15,000 I had considered giving my parents into something that actually mattered to me, starting a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from low-income families. I knew exactly what it felt like to struggle through university with no family support, working multiple jobs just to afford textbooks and rent. Creating this fund felt like honoring that 22-year-old version of me who had no one in her corner, and it felt infinitely better than giving money to people who had actively chosen not to be in my corner. The first scholarship recipient was a young woman named Isabella Rodriguez who reminded me so much of myself, determined and brilliant, but fighting an uphill battle with zero family support. When I told her she'd received the scholarship, she cried tears of gratitude, and I realized this was what generosity was supposed to feel like: empowering someone who deserved help, not enabling people who felt entitled to it. My relationship with Marcus deepened in ways I didn't expect once I set that boundary with my parents. He told me he'd been watching me carry the weight of their rejection for years, and seeing me finally choose myself made him love me even more. We started having conversations about the kind of parents we wanted to be when we had children, promising each other that our kids would never question whether they were loved or valued. We talked about breaking generational cycles, about creating a family culture built on support and encouragement instead of conditions and competitions. Setting that boundary with my parents wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about protecting the future family I hoped to build, and ensuring that the toxicity stopped with me, I also started investing more time in friendships that had been neglected while I was obsessing over earning my parents' approval. My best friend Amanda, who had stood by me through every tearful phone call about my family, planned a celebration of boundaries dinner at her house with our close friend group. These women had been my real family for years, showing up to every important moment, celebrating my wins, supporting me through losses, and never making me feel like I had to earn their love. Sitting around Amanda's table that night, laughing and sharing stories, I realized I had been so focused on the family that rejected me that I hadn't fully appreciated the family I had chosen. The people who show up consistently, who celebrate you genuinely, who support you unconditionally, those are your real family regardless of blood relation. The empowerment I felt from choosing myself rippled into every area of my life in unexpected ways. At work, I started speaking up more in meetings, advocating for my ideas with confidence instead of second-guessing myself constantly. I negotiated a significant raise, something I'd been too afraid to do before because part of me didn't believe I deserved it. I started saying no to commitments that drained me and yes to opportunities that excited me. My therapist, Dr. Chen, noticed the shift immediately, commenting that I seemed lighter, more present, more authentically myself than I'd been in years of sessions. The truth was that cutting off access to people who diminished me created space for me to finally see my own worth. And once I saw it, everything changed. But my decision didn't come without consequences, and the fallout from my choice was about to test just how committed I was to this new path. The fallout from my decision started within 48 hours when my brother Daniel called me screaming that I was destroying our family. He told me our parents were devastated, that my mother Linda had been crying for days, that my father Robert was so angry he couldn't even speak my name. Daniel accused me of being heartless, of letting success go to my head, of forgetting where I came from and who raised me. I listened to his rant calmly, and when he finally paused for breath, I asked him one simple question. Daniel, where were you when they didn't come to my wedding? The silence on the other end was deafening because he knew he had no answer, knew that he'd benefited from being the favored child while I was ignored and dismissed. He hung up without another word, and I haven't heard from him since. The extended family took sides quickly, and unsurprisingly, most of them sided with my parents because that's what families do. They protect the status quo, even when the status quo is toxic. My Aunt Maria sent me a long text message about honoring thy father and mother, conveniently forgetting all the time she'd witnessed them treat me poorly, and said nothing. My cousin Jessica, who had suddenly wanted to reconnect when she saw my success, posted vague things on social media about ungrateful children and fake people who forget their roots. The family group chat that I'd been barely included in anyway suddenly exploded with messages about me being selfish and cold, none of them acknowledging the years of pain that led to my decision. I left the group chat without responding because I realized I didn't owe explanations to people who had never bothered to understand my side of the story anyway. What surprised me most was how little the judgment actually hurt once I sat with it. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, this kind of family rejection would have destroyed me, sent me spiraling into depression and self-doubt. But now, having done the therapeutic work and finally understanding my worth, their opinions felt like background noise I could tune out. My mother sent me one final text message saying, "You're dead to us," and blocked my number, and instead of falling apart, I felt relieved. The relationship I'd been mourning for years was finally officially over, and there was strange peace in having clarity instead of constantly hoping things would change. Marcus held me that night and asked if I was okay, and I realized I genuinely was. The most unexpected repercussion was the positive one. Other people in my life started opening up about their own toxic family situations. Colleagues I'd worked with for years confided their stories of setting boundaries with difficult parents, and I realized how common this struggle was even though nobody talked about it publicly. My friend Jennifer told me she'd been estranged from her father for 3 years, and my decision to prioritize myself gave her validation that she'd made the right choice too. Women started reaching out to me on social media after I posted vaguely about choosing peace over obligation, sharing their stories and asking for advice. I realized that by standing firm in my boundary, I'd accidentally given other people permission to do the same, and that felt more meaningful than any family approval ever could. 3 months after the phone call with my mother, I received an official notice that my parents had lost their house to foreclosure. Part of me felt sad seeing the address where I'd grown up now belonging to someone else, but I didn't regret my decision. I had offered them something more valuable than money, an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on healthy terms, and they had chosen pride and entitlement over healing and growth. Their consequences were the result of their own choices, not my responsibility to fix. I used that moment to recommit to the life I was building, the scholarship fund I'd started, the healthy marriage I was nurturing, the career I was excelling in, and the peace I was protecting. The price of my family's approval had always been too high, but the reward of choosing myself was proving to be priceless, and I was just getting started on this journey of authentic living. 6 months after cutting ties with my parents, I started questioning everything I thought I knew about what family was supposed to be. Growing up, I'd been taught that family was blood, that no matter what happened, you stuck together, that loyalty to relatives was more important than your own happiness or well-being. But sitting in my therapist, Dr. Chen's office one afternoon, she asked me a question that changed my entire perspective. Sophia, if family is supposed to be the people who love and support you unconditionally, then who is your real family? The answer came immediately. Marcus, Amanda, Jennifer, my colleagues who celebrated my wins, the people who showed up consistently without conditions. If you're realizing that your chosen family matters more than your blood relatives, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because redefining family might be the most liberating thing you ever do. Who in your life has earned the title of family through their actions rather than just sharing your DNA? I started building intentional relationships with people who added value to my life instead of draining it away. My friendship with Amanda deepened as we started having weekly coffee dates where we actually talked about real things, vulnerable things, dreams and fears and hopes for the future. She became the sister I never had, someone who knew all my flaws and loved me anyway, someone who called me out when I was wrong, but always had my back. My colleague Michael became like a brother, the one who brought me lunch when I was stressed at work and reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to my productivity. These relationships weren't based on obligation or guilt. They were based on mutual respect, genuine care, and the choice to show up for each other consistently. Marcus and I also redefined what partnership meant to us without the toxic model my parents had provided. We started having conversations about the marriage we wanted to build, one where both people felt safe to be vulnerable, where support went both ways, where love wasn't conditional on performance or perfection. We created our own traditions: Sunday morning pancakes where we talked about our week, monthly date nights where phones stayed in the car, annual trips where we disconnected from work and reconnected with each other. We promised each other that when we had children, they would never question whether they were loved, never feel like they had to earn our approval, never experience the kind of rejection that had marked my childhood. I joined a support group for adults estranged from their families and discovered a whole community of people who understood exactly what I'd been through. Listening to their stories, I realized how common family dysfunction was, even though society pretended it wasn't. There was Carlos, who hadn't spoken to his abusive father in 5 years, Maya, who had set boundaries with her narcissistic mother and been disowned, Kevin, who had walked away from his entire family to protect his mental health. We became each other's chosen family, celebrating birthdays and holidays together, supporting each other through hard times, creating the kind of loving community we'd all been denied in our biological families. These people understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you. The most profound shift came when I stopped seeing family as something you're stuck with and started seeing it as something you create. I realized that the Norman Rockwell image of family that society sold us was a myth for many people, and that it was okay to grieve the family you wish you'd had while celebrating the family you were building. My real family was the network of people who chose to love me, who showed up consistently, who celebrated my success without jealousy, who supported me through failure without judgment. Blood might make you related, but love, respect, and consistent support make you family. And I finally had the family I deserved, even if it didn't look like what I'd been taught family should look like. Healing from decades of family rejection wasn't a straight line. It was messy and complicated, with good days and bad days and days where I questioned everything. Some mornings I'd wake up feeling strong and confident in my decision, and other mornings I'd wake up crying because I still grieved the mother-daughter relationship I'd never have. Dr. Chen reminded me constantly that healing isn't linear, that setbacks don't erase progress, that feeling sad sometimes didn't mean I'd made the wrong choice. She helped me understand that I was grieving multiple losses: the parents I actually had, the parents I wished I'd had, and the fantasy that someday they might change and become the parents I deserved. I started doing daily affirmations that felt silly at first, but gradually changed how I saw myself. Every morning I'd stand in front of my bathroom mirror and say things like, "I am worthy of love just as I am," and "My value isn't determined by other people's ability to see it," and "I choose peace over approval." Marcus would hear me through the door and smile, occasionally joining me to add his own affirmations about me. These simple statements slowly rewired the negative programming from my childhood, replacing messages of, "You're not good enough," with truths like, "You're exactly enough just as you are." It took months before I could say these things without my inner critic immediately arguing back, but eventually the positive messages started sticking. I also started investing in myself in ways I never had before, because I'd always felt guilty spending money or time on my own needs. I hired a personal trainer and started working out regularly, not to change my body, but to honor it and care for it after years of stress and neglect. I took a pottery class just because it sounded fun, no other reason, and discovered I loved creating things with my hands. I got regular massages and facials and justified them as self-care instead of self-indulgence. Each act of choosing myself, prioritizing my well-being, investing in my happiness, was a radical departure from a lifetime of putting everyone else first and hoping they'd eventually value my sacrifice. The biggest breakthrough in my healing came when I started helping other women who were going through similar situations with toxic families. I began sharing my story more openly, not for attention, but to let other people know they weren't alone in their struggle. Women reached out to me constantly, thanking me for giving them permission to set boundaries, to choose themselves, to walk away from relationships that were destroying them. One woman named Sarah told me that hearing my story gave her the courage to finally stand up to her emotionally abusive mother, and she was experiencing peace for the first time in 40 years. Turning my pain into purpose, using my experience to help others heal, gave meaning to everything I'd been through, and proved that breaking cycles benefits more than just yourself. A year after cutting ties with my parents, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I genuinely liked for the first time in my life. Not someone trying to be good enough for others, not someone performing worthiness, just me, Sophia Garcia, flawed and strong and worthy, exactly as I was. I had built a beautiful life filled with people who truly loved me, work that fulfilled me, hobbies that brought me joy, and most importantly, peace that no amount of family approval could match. The little girl who used to wait by the window for parents who never showed up had grown into a woman who showed up for herself every single day. That transformation, that healing, that self-valorization was the real success story, far more meaningful than any house or promotion or achievement, because it meant I'd finally come home to myself. Through my support group and social media connections, I met dozens of women who had walked similar paths of family rejection and boundary setting, and their stories became my lifeline on difficult days. There was Rebecca Thompson, a 40-year-old nurse who hadn't spoken to her parents in 8 years after they refused to accept her interracial marriage to her husband, James. She told me that the first 2 years were the hardest, filled with guilt and doubt. But now she had built such a beautiful life with James and their 3 children that she couldn't imagine sacrificing her peace to please people who couldn't accept her choices. Rebecca's story showed me that the pain of setting boundaries eventually gives way to the peace of living authentically. If hearing stories of other women's strength inspires you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video because we're stronger together, and your story might be the one that saves someone else. Do you have a story of choosing yourself that could inspire another woman struggling with the same decision? Another woman who became a close friend was Nicole Martinez, a successful lawyer who had been estranged from her emotionally abusive mother for 6 years. Nicole shared how her mother used to call her fat, criticize every choice she made, and compare her constantly to her perfect sister Emily, who could do no wrong. When Nicole finally set boundaries and limited contact, her mother told the entire extended family that Nicole was cruel and ungrateful, painting herself as the victim. Nicole lost relationships with aunts, uncles, and cousins who believed her mother's version of events, but she gained something more valuable: freedom from constant criticism and the ability to build genuine self-esteem. She told me something I'll never forget. "I'd rather be lonely and at peace than surrounded by people who make me feel worthless." Her words became a mantra I repeated whenever I doubted my decision. Then there was Kimberly Washington, a teacher in her 50s who had finally walked away from her narcissistic father after decades of trying to earn his approval. Kimberly described spending her entire adult life trying to be the daughter he wanted, getting the degrees he approved of, marrying the man he chose, living in the city he preferred, even naming her children what he suggested. Despite all that sacrifice, he still found fault with everything she did and made her feel like a failure. At age 48, after a particularly cruel comment at a family gathering, Kimberly finally snapped and realized she'd given away her entire life trying to please someone who would never be pleased. She cut contact completely, and for the first time in her life, started making choices based on what she wanted, not what would earn his approval. Within 2 years, she'd changed careers to something she loved, moved to a beach town she'd always dreamed of, and reported being happier than she'd ever been. My friend Priya Patel shared her story of being disowned by her traditional Indian parents when she refused an arranged marriage and chose to pursue her career in software engineering instead. Her parents told her she was dead to them, refused to attend her eventual wedding to a man she chose herself, and didn't meet their grandchildren for 5 years. Priya described the immense cultural pressure she faced, with her entire community telling her she was dishonoring her family and would regret her choices. But she stood firm in her boundaries, built an incredible life on her own terms, and eventually her parents came back wanting a relationship, but only after she'd proven she didn't need their approval to thrive. Priya's story taught me that sometimes people only respect your boundaries after they realize you're serious about enforcing them. What connected all these women's stories was a common thread. They all went through a period of intense guilt and doubt before reaching the other side where peace and self-acceptance waited. Every single one of them told me they wished they'd set boundaries sooner, that they'd wasted years trying to change people who had no intention of changing. Their experiences validated my own, showed me I wasn't crazy or cruel for choosing myself, and gave me hope that the hard road I was walking led somewhere beautiful. These women became my inspiration, proof that you could survive family rejection and actually thrive on the other side. Their courage gave me courage, their stories gave me strength, and their friendship gave me the family I'd always deserved, one built on mutual support, genuine love, and the shared understanding that sometimes saving yourself means walking away from the people who are supposed to save you. 2 years after that phone call from my mother asking for money, I sat in my home office reflecting on everything that had changed since I made the hardest decision of my life. The woman I'd become was almost unrecognizable from the people-pleasing, approval-seeking person I'd been before. I had learned that peace wasn't something you found. It was something you protected fiercely by removing anything that threatened it. My life now was filled with people who genuinely cared about me, work that fulfilled me, hobbies that brought me joy, and most importantly, a relationship with myself that was built on respect and love, rather than criticism and shame. The journey from broken to whole hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every painful step. Marcus and I were expecting our first child, a daughter we planned to name Isabella Rose, and I made a promise to her before she was even born that she would never question whether she was loved. She would grow up in a home where achievements were celebrated but not required for affection, where mistakes were learning opportunities, not character flaws, where her worth was unconditional, not something she had to constantly prove. Breaking the generational cycle of conditional love became my most important mission because I refused to pass on the trauma I'd received. Isabella would know what it felt like to have parents who showed up consistently, who believed in her dreams, who loved her exactly as she was. And that gift felt more valuable than any inheritance or family legacy. The scholarship fund I'd started had now helped 12 young women attend college, and their thank you letters sat in a folder on my desk that I read whenever I needed, reminding of why my decision mattered. These young women, who reminded me so much of my younger self, were now pursuing their dreams because someone believed in them and invested in their potential. One recipient, Maria Hernandez, sent me a photo of herself in her graduation cap and gown with a note that said, "You saved my life and didn't even know it." That one sentence justified every hard choice I'd made, every relationship I'd lost, every moment of doubt I'd pushed through, because turning my pain into purpose created ripples of positive change I never could have imagined. My relationship with myself had transformed completely through therapy, affirmations, and the consistent choice to prioritize my well-being over others' expectations. I no longer woke up with a sense of not being enough or spent my days trying to prove my worth to anyone. I knew who I was, a strong, successful, loving woman who had overcome incredible obstacles to build a life of authenticity and peace. The approval I desperately sought from my parents for 30 years no longer mattered, because I'd learned to give myself the validation they never could. I was proud of myself, not for my achievements or my house or my career, but for having the courage to choose myself when everything in my conditioning told me that was selfish. Looking back, I realized that my parents' rejection, as painful as it was, had actually been a gift wrapped in suffering. It forced me to build internal validation instead of seeking external approval, to create my own family instead of settling for toxic blood relations, to define success on my own terms instead of living by someone else's standards. If they had given me the love I craved, I might never have developed the strength, independence, and self-worth that now defined me. Their rejection redirected me toward a better life, one where I was surrounded by people who chose me daily, where my peace was non-negotiable, where my worth was inherent, not earned. To anyone listening who's struggling with a similar decision, know this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And on the other side of that hard choice is a version of you that's more whole, more authentic, more alive than you've ever been. The family that's meant for you will never require you to abandon yourself to earn their love, and the peace that comes from living authentically is worth more than all the approval in the world. Your liberation starts the moment you decide you're worthy of protection, even if that means protecting yourself from your own family. See you in the next video.